Hello everyone and welcome to Dennis Deep Cuts. This first installment of a YouTube channel show series. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be the first installment, and it's going to be me rambling on about music, art, culture, more music, and then some more music, and maybe possibly some politics as well. We'll see where we land. If you don't know who I am, my name is Dennis INVSN. I am a singer, songwriter, musician, agitator. You might know me from bands like Refused, The International Noise Conspiracy, INVSN, Fake Names, and many, many, many more. I'm sure over the course of this series, you'll hear about all of them. I promise you. I've done a couple of record labels, and I'm a massive, massive record collector. I'm a massive nerd, basically. So I figured what better way to celebrate that than to talk about music and talk about the records that I like and talk about things that I like. I also want to have conversations with guests. I want to talk about creativity. I want to talk about what it means to be a musician and an artist, and the things that brought us here, basically. So, I hope you're going to come along for the ride. So let's do it. So the first record I want to talk to you about is a Stone Cold classic. It's the record that it's the first record I bought with my own cash, and you'd say that's fairly important because now the only thing I buy with my cash is actually records. But it's also a record that kind of set me off the trajectory of curiosity and like seeing music as something bigger than myself. When John Lennon got killed in December of 1980, I saw the photos of the Beatles all over the newspapers, and I thought they looked super cool. And so I stole my dad's Beatles records. Thank you, Dad. I still have them in my collection somewhere. And I built Lego guitars, and I performed Beatles songs. It was mainly like I Want to Hold Your Hand and Love Me Do, and like the really early Beatles, like the early stuff. But then I saw a video on Swedish television, and I told my parents that, I want to buy this record. I really like this. This is a couple years later. I think I was maybe 11 at the time. And most of the other guys in my class were listening to hard rock and heavy metal, such as, I guess it was like mostly like Kiss and Whitesnake and that type of stuff. I bought this record. First record that I ever bought with my own cash is, of course, David Bowie's Let's Dance. It's released on the 19th of April in 1983, and it ended up selling almost 11 million copies of this record. We don't need to talk about Bowie that much. Maybe we should. We should talk about Bowie much, but it's the first record I bought with my own cash, and it's the same copy that I've owned since 1983. It traveled with me throughout my life, and even when you're a young person and you discover something new, you have a tendency to sort of abandon the old and be like, I'm done with the old now. Like let's just forge ahead, and now this is my identity. But even when I got into metal and when I got into hardcore and punk, the Bowie records almost travel with me. And I even remember during the hardcore years of the 90s, when we were really into hardcore. I'm just gonna say, a friend of mine asked, "Oh, you like Bowie? Do you want this really nice? It's like a picture disc, 7-inch box set." And he's like, "Do you want that?" I'm like, "Yeah." And so he traded this with me for a Chokehold record. If you don't know what Chokehold is, they're a band from Canada. So I got this one, But let's talk about this record a little bit. It's pretty fabulous. Definitely, I wouldn't say in the discography of Dave Bowie. I think it's his most commercially successful record, which is also, I think, was a bit of a problem for Bowie because he became, I mean, he was a big artist, you know, but when this record came out, he became one of the biggest artists in the world. And a lot of people say that it's the sort of the beginning of the end for the creative David Bowie, which I don't fully agree on, because even though Tonight and Never Let Me Down is kind of subpar Bowie records, maybe the two worst records of his entire discography, all the stuff he did after that is pretty amazing, pretty spectacular. It's super creative and really, really cool. If you haven't checked out Bowie from the you know, 90s and early 2000s, I think you have to. It is pretty great, actually. This record, I mean, Modern Love, China Girl, Let's Dance, solid bangers. And then there's a couple of filler tracks, but you know, when you're a young person, you don't really think about that too much. It's, you know, I mean, Cat People is on here, so that's also an amazing track. So yeah, it's the first record I ever bought. I mean, the second record I bought was Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. I think that would have been cooler, maybe, but it doesn't really matter. When I found out that David Bowie passed, this was the record that I got up out of bed. I woke up in the morning, I looked at my phone, and I saw that Bowie passed, and I got up and I put this record on immediately, and I listened to it all day, and then, you know, you just listen to Bowie for like an entire week. In 2002, David Bowie curated the David Bowie Meltdown in London, and my band, the International Noise Conspiracy, got invited to play. I'm not saying that David Bowie picked our band, but he curated the festival. So somewhere along the line, there was a meeting, and someone said, "What about this band, the International Noise Conspiracy?" And I guess David Bowie gave a thumbs up. And for me, that is massive. It's one of those deals where, you know, I never met Bowie. I only saw him live once. But there is this poster where it says David Bowie Meltdown Presents, and it's all these bands like Philip Glass and Coldplay and and David Bowie, and right there, it's an International Noise Conspiracy. And that's pretty massive for me, and it's still pretty massive for me. So yeah, the record that started everything, it's a bit beat up, but I'm gonna keep this record until the day I die. All right, the second record that I'm gonna talk to you about is one of those records that really set me off on like listening to heavy music, basically. As I said before, like all the guys, all the kids in my class was like into hard rock, basically. And I was like, I was into Bowie, and I was into Madness, was one of the other band that I was really into. And I wasn't really that interested. But then, once again, I saw a video on Swedish television. My mind was blown, and I bought this record. It's the Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon. Also released in 1983, actually, the same year as Let's Dance. And I love the video. I mean, it's super corny. Ozzy is a werewolf, and he's just running around. But there's something about the riff. There's something about the way Ozzy, like his voice, and I just loved it. It's his third solo record, and we don't really need to talk that much about Ozzy. He's, you know, living legend. You know, but I really like this record. But I went doing the research for this show. I realized that I have the European version of this record, and the American version has two different songs on the B side, and it's different sequencing, which I find quite interesting. And it is also one of those records that I would say the A side with Rock and Roll Rebel, Bark at the Moon, Now You See It, Now You Don't. That's three pretty awesome tracks, but then it kind of wears off, and the rest of the record's not that exciting. But I remember buying this and then having it, I taped it, so maybe when I was 12, like that entire summer, I listened to this record, and his second solo record, Diary of a Madman, which I actually like even more than this one. And then you have Blizzard of Oz, which I like even more than that one. So no, maybe Diary of a Madman might be the best one. What do you think? Which one is your favorite Ozzy record? I remember a funny story when I got into this, and like as I said previously, like I was like, now I started growing my hair long, and I was like, now I'm into hard rock, I'm into heavy metal, and a friend of my dad's said, you should come by. I have some hard rock records you might like, and I showed up, and he's like, yeah, so you're into hard rock, do you want to borrow these records? And he gave me the first 4 Black Sabbath records, maybe first 5, and a couple of Motorhead records, and listening to like Ozzy and Judas Priest and Whitesnake and Dio, and then hearing the first couple of Black Sabbath records and Motorhead records, it scared the shit out of me. They're pretty fucking great. All right, the next one I'm going to talk about is when things started going, I wouldn't say extreme, but at the time and place, I guess it was pretty extreme. While most kids around me quite content in listening to like the top names of heavy metal and hard rock, I was one of those kids that just like I wanted to dive deeper. I wanted to find more extreme stuff and more violent stuff and more, I wanted it to be faster and harder and more aggressive. And I remember early on, I was into heavy metal, but then a friend of mine had a tape and it had Metallica's Kill 'Em All on the A side. It had the first Bathory record on the B side. I was like, oh, this is amazing because it's so, it was different and it was faster and much more aggressive. So I really got into, always say, thrash metal. And Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax were Slayer, of course. One of the records that I was thinking about busting out was Slayer's Raining Blood, because it's probably one of the best records ever made. But I'm going to be true to myself and tell you that the record that really got me hooked on this music was this record. Anthrax, Among the Living. Their third record. I mean, we already had Spreading the Disease when that came out, and I think I also had Fistful of Metal. So I had like the previous records, and then this record came out 1987, I think. Yes, and it blew my mind. It was so much more consistent and it was so much more focused than the previous record. The sound was better, the songs were better. I think that every song on this record I can sing the entire songs by heart. We listened to this record so much, it's unbelievable. And it's interesting too, because Anthrax was one of those bands, they were hardcore adjacent. So obviously this record led me on a path where, when they talked about New York hardcore, and I'm like, I don't really know what that is, but I love this record. And I remember talking to my friend Jens, and he said, it sounds kind of almost like punk, but I guess in our undeveloped minds at the time, we actually like the mosh parts of the record we thought it was kind of punky. Still to this day, great record, still really holds up, and I love this record. Years and years later, Anthrax would actually record a cover of New Noise with Refused. Insane. I mean, this is a band, I had their posters all over my wall at home, and I found out that they're doing a Refused cover. I'm like, what the fuck? And so in like early 2000s, we're playing a show with Noise Conspiracy at the Download Festival in Hultsfred in Sweden, and Anthrax was on the bill. And I get an email from Scott Ian, and he says, do you want to sing New Noise with me? And I'm like, what? That can't be right. And I thought about it for a second. I'm like, well, 15-year-old Dennis would definitely hate you if you didn't do it. Like, you have to do this. Like, you have to. So, and this is a point in my career and life where I was like, not necessarily super stoked about singing Refused songs. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. So I wrote him back and I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sing New Noise with you. And actually to relearn the song, and we showed up at the festival, and I was kind of nervous, and it was like one of those, it's like a big metal festival. I don't know what Noise Conspiracy was doing there, but we were playing, and Anthrax had to cancel. So I missed out on my chance of singing New Noise with Anthrax, which is horrible. And a couple of years back, Anthrax came to Umeå, my hometown, and they played at House of Metal Festival. And I was touring at the moment, and it broke my heart because it was on the Among the Living anniversary, 30-year anniversary tour or something like that. And it broke my heart. And I couldn't be there. And then Scott Ian kept emailing me photos from Umeå. I'm like, this is insane. But yeah, Anthrax, Among the Living. They did a really nice YouTube series because they had like some anniversary the other year where they did short series, short movies about their whole career. And I really recommend it. It's really cool. And this record is, you can't live a dignified life without this record. All right, so the next one. Where are we going from here? What's the stakes? So at this point in my life, with Anthrax and metal, I've gotten into hardcore and like crossover bands like Crumbsuckers, Agnostic Front. You know, I'm dipping my toes in punk rock. For some reason, I had like Creative Records at home, and one day there's like a Troops of Tomorrow with Exploited in there, and I'm like, what the hell is this? But it was quite exciting. And one of the things for me, you know, with metal is that a lot of it seems really, it didn't seem like you could achieve what they were doing. Everyone was really good musicians, and there was like this, you know, rock star kind of thing about it. And then, so when I discovered punk and hardcore, it really, I'm like, this is more, it felt tangible. It felt like something that I could really get into. And so I was into a lot of that stuff, you know, the Misfits. We've at this point heard the first Chromax record. So I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that I had, and I was like, you know, like kind of straddling the fence of like, I like long hair, but I was like really into like suicidal tendencies. So I was like, you know, I was going that path. And then a friend of mine told me that the Dead Kennedys is the fastest band in the world. And I was like, oh, that sounds very exciting. So me and a friend went to town, and I bought 2 records. And one of them was DRI's Dealing With It. And the second one was Dead Kennedys, Gimme Convenience, and Gimme Death. It's by no means the fastest record or the fastest band. It's actually Dead Kennedys. It's a collection of their singles and some B-sides and some tracks from different compilations, and it's just glorious. And I don't know what I was expecting, because someone said, oh, it's going to be the fastest record of all time. But I put it on, and the first song that comes out is Police Truck. And I'm at my friend's parents' house in his room in the basement, and that song comes on, and I just remember this distinct feeling of nothing's ever going to be the same again. This is the best music I've ever heard in my entire life. And it's kind of the day that I decided that, you know, like, yeah, I'm into punk and hardcore now. That's just what it is. I mean, it's Dead Kennedys is one of those bands too that once I discovered this, like, it led me on a path towards politics, towards critical thinking. I mean, metal had some politics, but it was a bit vague. You had bands like Nuclear Assault and Sacred Reich, and you know, they touched upon political issues, but a lot of it just felt like it was like it was a fear of like a toxic fallout from a nuclear war. That's kind of the political agenda of metal. And I felt like a lot of it was like rebel without a cause. It was like, we are rebellious outsiders, but there's no real an analysis of why that is. And while I discovered punk and hardcore, it struck me as quite intelligent, and that there was like there's a pride and ownership of the outsider identity. And Dead Kennedys, with their collages and all the stuff that they have on their records, I mean, this one it's just a booklet, but you know, that's something that really blew my mind when they had all these you know, the collages and cut and paste and all the political stuff. So you say that Dead Kennedys is one of those bands that meant so much for me, and yeah, obviously all the records are great. One of these days I might do one of those like best to worst Dead Kennedys records. I mean, this is a singles compilation, so obviously almost every track on it is amazing, but just when the needle hits, a police truck started, my brain just exploded, and I felt that's it. The ironic part is, of course, that the other record I bought, DRI's Dealing With It, is super duper fast. You know, but it's a different story for a different day. We'll talk about DRI one of these days. I hope. They're one of those great bands too. I already had the crossover record. I thought it was pretty sweet, but then, you know, I heard Dealing With It, and I was like, this is fucking amazing. But this is the record. This is the one. All right, so the last record I'm going to talk to you about that really did, you know, change my trajectory in a quite radical way. I mean, at this point, so we've discovered hardcore and punk, the Dead Kennedys, DRI. There's a whole assembly of great music that I discovered. And I had a friend called John who recently passed. Rest in peace, my friend. He's one of those dudes that kind of like similar to me. He's always like, what's the most extreme music? You know, what's the craziest stuff? And he introduced me to the Swans and G.G. Allen. He introduced me to Jane's Addiction. And one day he calls me up and he says, oh, I discovered this band. They're super angry skinheads. I love them. They're so violent. It's so hard. And I'm like, oh, wow, that sounds amazing. And it's this one. It's Youth of Today, Break Down the Walls. And I kind of get it. They look like skinheads, sort of type of skinheads. And he loved this because it was violent and it's raw and tough, and I really liked it as well. I liked it so much that I traded this record. I was like, I want that record, and I made a trade. I gave him the first pressing of Napalm Death Scum. You know, speaking of fast music, it's pretty fast. I've actually rebought the Napalm Death record, but yeah, that was my trade. I took this home and I listened to it the summer of 1988. Yeah, that's the summer I listened to Youth of Today all of the summer. Like I had a summer job, and this was on my headphones at all times. And then one day, so John moved down south to go to school, and one day he calls me up and he says, Youth of Today is coming to town. You come check it out. And I said, yes, of course I will. And 2 weeks before I was supposed to go down and see Youth Today, a car hit me while I was skateboarding, and it ran over my skateboard. And I had to make a choice, like buy a new skateboard or go see Youth Today live. I opted for the new skateboard because there was a skateboard competition coming up, and I wanted to skateboard. So I missed it. And then John calls me up after the show and he says, yeah, it's pretty good, but they're straight edge. Fuck that. And I'm like, what? Straight edge? And I started reading the lyrics and I putting two and two together. I'm like, oh, that's what they're singing about. And then I became straight edge. And that was a huge part of my life for a very, very long time. And it was a huge, like, kind of defining factor in the first couple of bands that I had. Like my first hardcore band called Step Forward. I had a punk band before that. And I at the end, I wanted to incorporate some of the halftime mosh parts, but it is too much punk. And then we started a hardcore band called Step Forward. It was heavily influenced by Youth Today, Sick of It All, 7 Seconds, Minor Threat, all that good stuff, Negative Approach. And I became straight edge, and I was for a very, very long time, and I still don't drink, I still don't do drugs. So yeah, Youth Today, Break Down the Walls. The record is pretty fucking rad. The lyrics are quite corny. You know, there's a lot of there's a lot of hardcore posturing on it, which, you know, it's fine. I must say that I like the Can't Close My Eyes, EP a little bit better because it's a bit more raw. And then I really love the We're Not in This Alone album as well. Youth of the Age is a great band, and lucky enough to get to know all these guys actually. Yeah, great band. So there you have it, 5 records that changed my life. Next time I'll talk about more cool records. A friend of mine asked me recently, what's your record collection like? And I said, it's pretty cool. So join me on this journey and you might find out. If you enjoy this, leave some comments, or what was the first record that you bought? Or what was the first record that really changed your life? Like, share, subscribe, all that good shit. And we'll see you on the next installment of Dennis Deep Cuts. Stay wild.